Hello everyone viewing our open educational resource on podcasting and education. My name is Johnny, and in this video I will be talking about how to use the Anchor app to create a podcast. Anchor app here, it's got 4 different buttons. The one on the left with the plus sign, when you go into it, it says voice messages. It allows you to send messages to other Anchor users. So you could actually create a podcast and you have a space where listeners could leave you voice messages, give you feedback, ask questions, and give you content to create for their episodes. There is an interactive aspect to this app. The folder button allows you to keep all your segments you've created and reuse them. The music button allows you to create sample songs as intros. The only problem is that only Anchor app users can listen to the music, as it's a copyright issue. And these are transitions on the very right to add between your segments. So let's create an episode right now. So let's start with a little bit of music. Under the Sea, let's go with Under the Sea, Little Mermaid. Why not? It's a fun song. So add to episode, and I've got my theme music. Hello and welcome to my sample podcast. And I can swipe for background tracks, and let's say that I'm happy with Galaxy. I'm going to call this Intro to Sample, and I've got my intro. Now always click not yet when you are still making your episode. And if you do click publish this episode by accident, you can always go back and rework your episode. Now I like to have transitions, so let's say I like the sound of beans, and I'm going to put in beans. Add transition to episode. Not yet. In today's podcast, we were talking about how to make a podcast on the Anchor app, which is very straightforward and intuitive. So I am going to add this section. Now, mistakenly, I did not label this section of the podcast. So if you want to go back and edit the episode, you click the little button on the top left and I hit edit this episode, and I can always go here and rename the segment. So I'm going to call this body 1. All right. And this is kind of the layout of all the different segments. I can add more segments by hitting the plus sign. All right. I can move things around and whatnot. So far I have these 4 things on my podcast, and let's say that I'm almost finished. So I add another transition or so, and I finish my podcast with thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Please check back next week for more episodes. And I call this outro. So now that I'm finished my outro, my sample podcast is ready to be published. So I just hit publish on the top right hand corner. Make sure you give it a proper name. Whatever your interesting podcast, title is going to be. The sample I gave earlier was a few minutes of real world math. But for this one, I'm just going to call it sample podcast episode 1. Episode 1. And when I hit publish, it's going to distribute my podcast to various platforms where you can, download podcasts such as the podcast, Apple Podcast, or Android Podcast, or things like that. So just to finish off this section of the tech tools, if you want to download your finished published podcast as an MP3 format, you'll need to do that through the Anchor.fm website, where you log into the same account that you created on your mobile app. So let's just do that right now. All of your podcast episodes should show up on the bottom right corner here. And so if you want to download this as an MP3, you click these 3 dots and you click download to desktop, and voila, it should be on the bottom right-hand corner. Just kind of show that right there, real world map, and show in Finder. There it is. I've got my M4A format of my podcast. And so you can use that to embed into your website, or you can even just if I click into an episode here, embed the code onto the website as well. So those are some other tips that can help you use this Anchor app more efficiently with your class or in general. I hope you found this useful, and thanks for listening.